November 28th, 1944. A radar operator on the submarine USS Archerfish gets a return so massive he's convinced his set is broken. The watch officer dismisses it, a small, unmapped island. But then the island starts moving, 20 knots. The submarine's commander, Joseph Enright, is on his third patrol with 0 confirmed kills. Months earlier, he was relieved of command, officially cited for being insufficiently aggressive. This is his last chance. And in front of him, a ghost on the radar, is the largest target any submariner has ever seen. That moving island was the Shinano, the largest and most heavily armoured aircraft carrier ever built, on its top-secret maiden voyage. This is the story of a 6-hour underwater chase and a catastrophic failure. The question is not just how a lone submarine could sink this 72,000-ton behemoth, but why the supercarrier, supposedly designed to survive 20 torpedo hits, went down in a matter of hours from just a handful.
The Hunter USS Archerfish was no special weapon. A standard Palau-class submarine, one of over 100 built, she was operating alone, deep in enemy territory. For her commander, the stakes were intensely personal. That official reprimand for caution wasn't just a mark on his record. In the aggressive culture of the US submarine force, it was a career-ending judgment. This single contact was his last chance at redemption. His target was anything but standard. The Shinano was a strategic asset, built on the colossal hull of the 3rd Yamato-class super battleship. Her armour plating was thick enough to stop almost any naval shell or aerial bomb. But this floating fortress harboured a fatal secret. She was incomplete. The growing threat of American B-29 raids on the Yokosuka shipyard had forced the Imperial Navy into a desperate gamble: get the carrier to the safety of the inland sea before it was destroyed at the dock.
She sailed with an inexperienced crew, missing crucial pumps, and with hundreds of watertight compartments whose doors were either not yet installed or had never been tested. Her captain, Toshio Abe, knew he was commanding a ship that wasn't ready for a fight. But for Commander Enright, there was a more immediate, seemingly impossible problem. The Shinano was moving at a steady 20 knots. The Archerfish's top surface speed was barely more than that. Submerged, she was hopelessly outpaced. In a straight-line race, the Archerfish could never win. The ghost on his radar would simply pull away and vanish over the horizon. For the next hour, the chase was a study in futility. On the surface, the Archerfish's diesel engines strained, pushing her to her absolute limit, 19 knots. It wasn't enough. The target, maintaining a steady 20 knots, was inexorably pulling away. The patrol log from that night reflects a growing despair as the radar contact grew fainter. The opportunity of a lifetime was vanishing over the horizon. And then the enemy handed them a miracle. Captain Abe, following standard Imperial Navy anti-submarine doctrine, ordered his task force to begin a zigzag course. While the maneuver was designed to foil an attack, it had a fatal mathematical side effect. It drastically reduced the group's overall speed of advance. The Japanese zigzag had just given Commander Enright the one thing he desperately needed: time. A 6-hour game of geometry and nerve had begun in the darkness. Inside the Archerfish, the mood of despair evaporated. In its place, intense mathematical focus. On the plotting table, Commander Enright and his executive officer, Lieutenant Bob, traced the enemy's course. It was a predictable zigzag pattern, a series of sharp turns at regular intervals. The Shinano was faster, but it was not travelling in a straight line. By cutting across the corners of the zigzag, by racing along the hypotenuse of the triangles the carrier was tracing on the ocean, the Archerfish could slowly, painstakingly, close the distance. For hours, they ran the numbers, predicting the next turn, calculating their own intercept course. It was a race against a clock, and a problem in geometry, with the biggest warship in the world as the prize. Aboard the Shinano, they were not blind. Her lookouts and radar operators had detected the submarine, but Captain Abe was not concerned. He had a screen of 3 destroyers, and he was confident his speed of 20 knots and his anti-submarine maneuvers were more than enough protection. One of his escorts, the destroyer Isokaze, broke off and headed for the contact. Minutes later, the crew of the Archerfish felt a series of distant, percussive jolts. The Isokaze had dropped a pattern of 14 depth charges, but the attack was based on a hasty sonar reading. The charges exploded harmlessly, far from the submarine. On the Shinano's bridge, the contact was logged and the threat was considered neutralized, a fatal assumption. For Enright, the risk was escalating. To maintain speed, the Archerfish had to remain on the surface, a 300-foot black silhouette against the dark, churning sea. At any moment, a sharp-eyed lookout on one of the destroyers could spot them, and the hunter would become the hunted. As the hours passed and the submarine clawed its way ahead of the task force, Enright made a critical decision. Based on pre-war intelligence about the design of Japan's capital ships, he knew the thickest armour was a massive belt deep below the waterline, designed to stop shells and torpedoes. He ordered his torpedo men to set their Mark 14 torpedoes for a shallow run, just 10 feet deep. He wasn't aiming for the fortress. He was aiming for the unarmoured, vulnerable hull just above it. Just after 3 a.m. on November 29th, the geometry problem was solved. The Archerfish was finally ahead of the Shinano's predicted path. "Dive! Dive!" Enright ordered. The submarine slipped beneath the waves. Enright raised the attack periscope, and there it was. The colossal shadow of the Shinano, so large it filled his entire field of view. And then the enemy delivered the final piece of the solution. As part of its zigzag, the supercarrier began a turn, swinging its massive hull directly toward the Archerfish, presenting a perfect 90-degree broadside. The range was just 1,400 yards, the perfect shot. At 3:17 a.m., Enright's voice was steady. "Fire 1. A slight shudder ran through the submarine. Then, at 8-second intervals, "Fire 2. Fire 3. Fire 4. Fire 5. Fire 6. 6 torpedoes, each carrying over 600 pounds of Torpex explosive, were in the water, streaking silently toward their target. Enright didn't wait to watch. "Take her down," he commanded. "Rig for deep submergence. Rig for silent running." The crew of the Archerfish braced for the depth charge counterattack they knew must be coming. A little over a minute later, they heard it. Not the crash of depth charges, but a series of dull, powerful thuds echoing through the hull. 4, then 5, maybe 6 impacts. The attack had worked. But the fate of the Shinano would not be decided by American torpedoes. It would be decided by untested pumps, unsealed doors, and a series of fatal errors deep inside the supercarrier's hull. Aboard the Shinano, the initial reports to Captain Abe were not alarming. 4 torpedo impacts along the starboard side. The ship shuddered, but she was a fortress, designed to absorb far worse. But deep below the waterline, a catastrophic failure was unfolding. The torpedoes had struck the ship's hidden weakness, a structural joint where the thick battleship armour met the thinner anti-torpedo bulge. The seam buckled, ripping open unstoppable gashes. Then the human errors began. The inexperienced crew, who had never drilled for damage control, couldn't properly seal the watertight doors. Key pumps weren't even installed. The flooding spread from one compartment to the next. The ship wasn't just damaged, it was bleeding out internally, and no one knew how to stop it. As dawn broke on November 29th, the fight for the Shinano was over. The list had reached an impossible angle. On the flight deck, men could no longer stand. All power had failed. The lights were out, the pumps were silent. Captain Abe, realizing the ship was lost, made one last desperate attempt to run her aground. But the engines were dead. At 10:18 a.m., nearly 7 hours after the torpedo impact, he gave the N. Final order: abandon ship. The escorting destroyers moved in, but as they tried to rescue the crew, the massive carrier began to roll. At 10:57 a.m., the Shinano, the largest warship in the world, capsized. Stern first, she slipped beneath the waves, taking Captain Abe and over 1,400 of his crew with her. The symbol of Japan's naval ambition was gone, just 10 days after it was commissioned. When Commander Enright's report reached Pearl Harbor, it was met with disbelief. The Shinano's existence was a total secret. But when post-war intelligence confirmed the kill, the man once cited for being insufficiently aggressive was awarded the Navy Cross. His personal redemption was absolute. But the sinking was more than a tactical victory. It was a brutal lesson. Japan had the engineering genius to design a supership, but its crumbling industry couldn't build it to standard. The Shinano wasn't sunk by 4 torpedoes alone. It was sunk by rushed production and a fatal deficit of experience. Japan didn't just lose its ultimate warship, it lost the illusion that one perfect weapon could still save it. The Shinano was built to endure the enemy's most powerful weapons. In the end, it was undone not by the enemy's strength, but by its own unfinished steel and untrained hands.